Right. Thank you, Gina, for the kind invitation and the kind introduction. Right. How am I going to do today's presentation is this. Actually, I have a live presentation, but I don't think it's easy to do a demo. But fortunately, I can most of the images, so you should have a very experiential feel of the whole presentation. Right. So just a quick introduction about ourselves. Right. We have been doing internet surveillance for the last 16 years already, right? So I use the word internet surveillance because most of you will tell me 16 years ago social media do not exist, right? So it's just plain old internet. The blogs came about in 2003, became very popular, right? But in 2000 it's mainly the forums and Usenet. How many of you knows Usenet? A show of hand. Anybody know Usenet? Oh, I see one hand putting up. Yes, Usenet used to be the grand old daddy of forums that we know of today, right? So when you know Usenet, it shows how old you are, maybe more white hair like me. Right? So, but over the years, we've been monitoring internet-based content. The general characteristic about internet content is that they are unstructured in nature. Right? They are human languages. So what we have built out over the last few years is not just harvesting of content, right? Tracking of content, but also in the space of analytic, right? And I'll share with you more in the next 2 slides, and then we will go into the proper presentation, all right? So, as I was saying, when we first started, it is mainly internet monitoring. Then it became blog, it became RSS newsfeed, right? And in 2007, 2009, there was a swing over towards social media type of content, right? Social media content is humongous. It is wild. It spreads like wildfire. There are certain characteristics there because it uses the network to propagate the information, right? So you have a bad news of some sort, you can be sure through social media it will spread like wildfires, right? So you need to watch out for the network, how influential the network is, how big the network is, and so on. And from there, we move on recently in the last 2 years more towards engagement, right? So you can see the trend moving not just in terms of listening, right, but being able to interact, right? It's like answering the question of so what. Right? So what if I found out about this issue? How do I tame the issue? How do I prevent it from spreading like wildfire? Right? So this is where the engagement activity we have, right, that allow you to actually engage with the influencer, with the prospect, right, or in the more corporate marketing context, so you will probably be interested in somebody who says something not too nice about your brand, right? He's an influential person, you need to pick it up and you need to be able to do something about it. All right, so I'll be showing you what we can do in those space. All right, so it's moving towards listening, towards more of engagement. Right, so the methodology we have is that we always need to start with the feeds. We need to start tracking. What do we want to track, right? So we can start tracking the Vietnamese tweets. We can start tracking the Vietnamese Facebook fan pages, right? Or if you have any unique social internet gathering space, right? Like in Singapore, you have the hardware zone. In Malaysia, you have Loyak. Right? So all these are popular gathering areas, so-called gathering on the online space. So this is where people will talk about your brand, will talk about your product, right? So this is where usually we will start monitoring it. And because the data that we collect is so humongous, right? To ask a human to read it is literally a very cruel thing. Right? So if you are assigned to read the data one by one, it's very cruel to do that. Right? So you use machine to actually make sense of the information, visualize it through the dashboard. That is where you discover. Right? So the algorithm inside there will kind of pick up the key themes, right? Using neural network type of algorithm, right? Understanding the nouns, understanding the verbs, right? Being able to classify nouns into human, into organization, into product, right? The algorithm actually allow you to train for new products, right? New product name, right? So, or even new product category, right? So you can actually train it, right? And from there, you can get nice visual in the form of tag cloud, in the form of graph, in the form of a network diagram, and so on. Right? So once you discover the key issue, you would like to engage with the community, right? So that's where the engagement process come about. Right? So in the dashboard, this is one of the view, right? So for you, all of you who are Singaporeans, right, you'll be very familiar with this topic because we just had our election, a by-election, right? So I thought it's interesting to show this because every candidate is a brand, every political party is a brand, right? So if you monitor the Twitter space, all right, the brand could be the name, of course, or the hashtag, all right? So you find that right at the bottom right, so different political party will have their own slogan, right? So from there you can see how political party actually use their election slogan, right? How do they propagate their message to the masses, right? So of course, it is usually the underdog who will actually use more of social media because they need to work harder in the social media space to get their message through to the masses, right? But of course, it's not a political forum, so I won't talk about the details of the data inside there, right? But just to give you a sample, right? So I will touch a bit on some of this example later. Now, the business challenge, of course, is not what I just showed you. The business challenge is, of course, how to successfully prospect, right, pregnant mom, right, in the third trimester. Third trimester is not an easy job, right, because in social media, right, it depends on how people use social media to interact with their friends, right, their loved ones, their families, and so on, right? So at least in Singapore, in Chinese, in the Asian context, is a bit of a taboo topic actually, right? If you are in the first month of pregnancy, usually nobody talk about it, right? In the first trimester, right? Usually nobody talk about it, right? So it is not easy to capture such information actually, right? Because we don't usually talk about it, right? But firstborn, lots of data, all right? Firstborn, people announce it, right? So that it depends on your social context as well, right? So I won't say it's easy, right? But there are enough information, right, out there for us to use our data mining tool to make some sense of the data, to be able to classify into a list of prospects, right, into a list of influencers as well, right? So I don't know about Vietnamese culture actually, right? I don't know, right? Do people on the online space talk about being pregnant, right? Maybe not in the first trimester, right? But definitely not rarer in the Asian context, especially in the Chinese, right? I can speak only for myself, right? So doing exercise in internet surveillance, you also have to look into the social, right, context as well, right? So yeah, so that be mindful of such activity. Right. So this I'll enter into the presentation, right? So what we are doing is to use, like what Gina says, right? We have the system called Trendicate, right? So it has the whole 4-stage of activity, tracking of content, bringing content down, right? So that you can analyze it, right? And then you can visualize it on the dashboard, and you can engage with the community, right? The 4 stages. Right. Incidentally, this just a bit about the IT aspect of it, because I know there are some IT people in your midst, right? So this system is actually an enterprise software, right? It's not cloud-based, right? So it's enterprise. Once it's installed in the server, all right, you have almost unlimited access to it. You can create any amount of campaign, any amount of monitoring and collection, right? As long as your hard disk allows it, right? So it's one-time setup, almost like a buffet subsequently, right? So that is the model, right? So One I'm going to touch on is using the system, right? I worked together with Gina to actually come up with the methodology on how we can actually embark on this monitoring, analysis, and what to analyze, right? So the two things that we come up with, right, the end result is actually a list of prospect. Prospect will be the mothers. All right, so sorry, the expectant mom. All right, expectant mom is the proper terminology. A list of expectant mom, and because we are doing surveillance on the topic of pregnancy, we also have collected a whole list of so-called influencer. Right, so the influencers are people whom you will probably need to watch out for as well, right? To make sure that they say something nice about your brand, right? Or even to use this influencer to propagate your brand subsequently. Right, so that's the engagement portion, and of course, the system, as I say, once it's installed in your premise, you can use it for market intelligence, right, or even further consumer segmentation, right? So the further consumer segmentation that are possible are maybe active mom, right, a fashionable mom, right? So from tweets, you categorize them using machine learning into different category, a list of prospect, a list of influencer. From the list of prospect, you could also potentially do more segmentation into active mom, fashion mom, and so on, right? I have to admit that the further segmentation, we didn't have enough time to dwell into it, so I didn't build up much example over there. Right? So how do we go about doing it? All things start with a marketing objective, right? So from marketing objective, you monitor the internet, right? And internet content are, of course, a sentence. If you do a Twitter analysis, it's a sentence, right? So by pulling in the sentence, the tweets, right? By pulling in the tweets, you analyze it, and from there, you gain other insights into it, right? And the end result is the Twitterer, right? Or the profile of the person who tweets, right? So the end result is we want the human, right? The group, the segment of people, so that we can engage them, right? So start with objective, monitor the post, bring down the post, analyze the post, analyze the person, right, and come up with a profile of the person, right? So that's the basic process, right? The detailed part, of course, is in identifying the feed. In this case, we decide to use Twitter to monitor the tweeters, right? Of course, you can use it to monitor the forums, blogs, and so on, right? There's no restriction on that, right? So in this case, we decide to use Twitter as a demonstration, right? You read using the dashboard, right? And you kind of model it, right? Based on the language that people use, right? And you have to eyeball it first, right? There's always a little setup process, right? So from there, after you eyeball the data, you identify about 10 positive tweets, 10 negative tweets, right? And feed it into the engine so that you have a category called expectant mom. The machine language will actually analyze the positive and the negative, right? And it will automatically detect what are the keywords used in those sentences, right? And subsequently, once it's trained, you can leave it on its own to actually categorize content properly, right? So that is the rough idea, right? Massive. The last part is actually talking about the machine learning, right? A whole bunch of data. You need to train it first. Typically a 10 positive document, 10 negative document, feed it into the engine, right? And it should be able to learn on its own, right? So that's the training part, so that that's where we create the market segments, right? The middle part. And subsequently, right, you just have to check the content, make sure that they are correct. Just sometimes the machine may stray in this learning, so you just have to correct it, right? Correcting it is just like saying, this is not correct, you just delete it and train the engine so that subsequently similar content of this nature will not go into this bin, All right, so review the content and finally generate, the system will automatically go into the profile of the people, right, and find out how many followers it has, right, so you have more followers and it's constantly talking about such a topic, it becomes an influencer, all right. So I'll show you the examples of it. And what can you do with the list of prospects? What can you do with the list of influencers, right? So a possible suggestion is, right, after you come up with the list of prospects, right, it is of course easy to use the tool to actually engage the person, right? You can say, go to this shop, right, to redeem a coupon for a free Huggy, for example, right? Because we already identified that these are expectant moms, right? So if they have any other queries in the system, you can also reply to their query, reply to their concern, right? And everything is all nicely tracked in the system, right? So that you can set KPIs, right? Inquiry got to be responded in 2 hours, in 2 days, all right, within a week, all right? Those type of things will be carefully tracked in the system. Influencers, right? So we have a list of influencers. The influencers are powerful people, right? They can affect what they say, potentially can affect the brands, your brand, right? So you may want to engage them, especially if you have a promotion, a social media promotion. Now you know who are the influencers in this particular segment using the tool, right? Because it can harvest it for you, right? And it gives you a nice report of who are the influencers. You can click in, you can look at their posts, right? If they are in line with your social media marketing campaign, you can actually use the system to converse with them, to have a conversation with them, right? To get them to champion your brand, for example, right? So that is the list of influencers. Right. So much for flowchart. Let's see the real thing, right? So the tweet. Right, so we have collected a whole bunch of tweets from originating in Australia, right? As I mentioned when we first started the project, I wasn't sure whether I can find any tweets in Singapore, right? Talking about pregnancy, right? But there are actually some tweets from Singapore actually, right? But in this case, we use Australia because the volume is higher. Right, so from the tweets, we categorize into, right, on the left-hand side, right, you see the expectant mom, influencer, and we also have a category for new parent, right? Since we have already collected so much information, we just categorize, right? So there are actually two lists of prospects. The new parents, that means those who announced their firstborn, right, or talking about their young kids journaling their life as a young parent, right? So we captured that as a new parent, expectant mom, and influencers, right? On the left-hand side, you see three basic categories. So influencers, all right, after we collect the documents, right? So this is the document perspective, right? So when we do the collection, we collect the documents, right? Because the documents is the starting point, right? So once we find out a bit about the document that is relevant, we actually go in to analyze the profile of the Twitterer, right? So this is the profile view, right? You'll find that in this short collection, we collected only about 15 days worth of data, right? Not too much, right? Only 15 days, but there are already about thousands of documents inside there, right? So in that 15 days, somebody by the name of Mary Bacon, a radio presenter, right, surfaced as one of the influencers that talk about pregnancy, right? Radio presenter, yeah, I think it's probably influential, right? So, and then there are others, practitioner, a male who is also talking about pregnancy. He's not pregnant, but he's probably quite active in this space as a practitioner. Oops, wrong one. Right. And when you drill into any of the profile, you will find we give you more information, right? So this is where you see other tech clouds as well, right? Tech clouds that give you a glimpse about who this influencer is, right? What does he stand for? What is he constantly tweeting about, right? So Tech Cloud gives you quick visibility, right? Without having to read each of the posts, right? And you can see the volume, very consistent number of tweets, right? Right, very consistent number of tweets, right? There are some blanks in front because we didn't collect any of the data before that, right? And the top URL, top mention, top hashtags that the person has used, right? And over here, do we have a pointer of some sort? Not sure, no pointer, right? No pointer? Right, so over here, this is where you can actually post your messages, right? And on top, you see other tabs, conversation, activity, timeline, right? So just a quick orientation of what this platform is about, right? So this platform actually gives you enough information before you actually engage the person, right? The conversation tab will show you all the historical conversation that your team had performed with this Twitterer. Right? So on one dashboard, on one page, you have access to all the information. You can decide whether you want to engage with the person or to ignore him. If you decide to engage with this person, you can check historically anybody in your company had already had a conversation with him. Right? If somebody had already done it, you may review what the person was saying. So everything is all tracked in one centralized place. Everything goes up, it's an official tweet using your company Facebook tweet and not a personal tweet. All right? Right. So if you go to the Twitter page, the Twitterer, this is the you and your family, right? So you can see that this is a potential influencer, right, in the space of on the topic of pregnancy, right? Other influencer, you find that this person has an average tweet of 13 tweets a day, very consistent, right? 13 tweets a day, why so consistent, right? Definitely he's using a tool like Trendicate, right? He schedules the tweets, when it's going to be sent out and so on, right? Definitely somebody very active in the space of pregnancy, the topic of pregnancy. All right, so expectant mom, right? So we move to so we have a list of influencers whom you can engage or you can pass to your media agency, right? Or they can actually do the social media marketing program through them, right? So a list of expectant mom, right? So every line over here, there's always an opportunity for you to hit a reply button. When you hit a reply button, you actually engage with the mom, right? If you have a marketing campaign that you want to target the whole bunch, of course, you can just select the whole bunch and send out everything in one shot. Everyone will be personalized with an @ sign for Twitter, all right, so that it will go into their personal software that they are using, the Twitter software. All right, so identify tweets for follow-up. Right, so this is the follow-up view, right? You have your reply, right? Your post. If you have a lot of conversation, naturally you see more entries on the left-hand side, right? And the right-hand side shows a wallboard of some sort, right? So you may want to build some form of a command center of some sort, right? If you do active engagement, right? So all this will go to a TV screens. You will know in your your Twitter account, how many posts actually comes in, how fast were they attended to, right? And which agent actually engage how often in the Twitter community, right? And so I touched on the list of influencer, the list of prospect, right? So because the system is an enterprise system, you have full access to it, right, to do anything you want. So a lot of our customers, of course, use it for monitoring competitors, right? Competitors' brand, right? And you can imagine that it's pretty easy. Like for this, you can see Singtel, M1, StarHub, right? These are 3 telcos in Singapore, right? So you can just quickly bring up a dashboard to monitor the different contents inside there, right? To have a sense of how effective your social media campaign is, right? You can do the hashtag, the count, and different topics as well, all right? So one system to profile the customer, one system to monitor your competitor, and potentially you can even do a segmentation, right? Fashion mom, active mom, relaxed mom. These are just 3 broad categories of further segmentation that we have done, right? So active moms, right? How do we collect active moms, right? So active moms are those who mention that they did prenatal yoga, all right? Active moms are those that they go for an evening walk, all right? Who encourage walking. Fashion moms are those who constantly talk about clothing, right? Fashion in their tweets, right? So of course the system also have sentiment analysis, right? It can profile the volume of tweets, the Twitterers, and so on, right? So it's all built into the dashboard. You can click into it and you can analyze the tweets from the same dashboards, right? So I've been signaled to wind up, right? So that's the last one and just a summary, right? So what I've touched on today, just to recap, one system, enterprise system, right? It's a full buffet. Any of your KC community can just log in using your web browser, right? Set up a social media campaign, right? Monitor the campaign results in the form of a dashboard. Click in, right? The system allows you to keep track of all your conversation, your engagement with the community, be it the list of influencers, the list of prospect, or any disgruntled customer that you want to pacify online, all right? So you can use it for market intelligence and possibly also for further market segmentation. That is the only portion that we didn't do a very active job over there, right? And that ends my presentation.
That is indeed very interesting. Thank you very much for your effort. I have 2 questions. One is that can this sort of identification be done on other platforms like Facebook or on other social forums or baby forums, etc.? So that's the first question.
Yes.
And the second is that the prime prospects that we identify, can we retarget them onto totally different platforms like YouTube or Google or other platforms?
That's right. Yes, thank you for the questions, right? So the answer to both of them is actually a yes, right? However, right? So it is quite ironical, right? When we first started 2000, right, the volume of data we collected was almost exponential all the way to 2010, 2011, right? So that's where the volume of data, it's not that people are producing less data, but each of the platform actually introduces new restriction on the collection of data, right? It's like for Facebook, right? We can only legally collect Facebook fan pages that belongs to you, right? Through the APIs. Right? So YouTube, yes, used to be able to, Facebook, right? Facebook, I can collect from Facebook fan page that belongs to you, that you do your consumer interaction and engagement as a customer support center, right? So that part is no problem. Twitter, we still can collect them, as you have seen, right? YouTube, not a problem, since Google has a rich API for us to actually collect and harvest all the content, right? So forums, right? So in Singapore, there's a popular forum sites that we monitor. It's called the kiasuparent.com, right? So yes, it's possible to collect from all these different medias, right? The more the merrier, right? We need lots of data for machine to productively go through it automatically, right? So hopefully that answers your 2 questions.
Sort of answers the first question. The other is taking, let's say, even if you've identified a prospect, let's say in Facebook,
yes,
but you want to target them in YouTube, you know, so can you have, let's say, a retargeting that is independent to where you identified them from?
Right. There is a profiling tool inside there, right? It is not easy unless the person uses the same, let's say the same ID, right? In Facebook as well in Twitter and in YouTube, right? There is a chance that he could be using different ID, right? Because his ID could be taken by somebody, all right? So there is that possibility, right? We have a tool that actually link different social media identity to a single person, right? So usually we would do that for highly influential person where we really want to keep track of his social media profile, or a highly disgruntled customer, right? Where we know that he could potentially be posting at all his social media sites, right? So that's where we build up the profile of that person so that you can engage him carefully in all the social media space. Yes.
So why is it done only for, for sort of special people? What prevents us from doing it for all the prospects that we find?
Okay, so we like automation, right? This part of the activity, unfortunately, is manually entered, right? Because it's not easy to deduce that this few social media profiles belong to the same person, right? So it has to be manually entered into the system. Right?
Just a bit more detail on, it's very clear and very powerful the way the prospects and the influencers are identified. But my question is actually, and maybe you missed touching on this, which is the last part, which is the segmentation, is that through this tool, is it also possible, so for example, if you have your top 10 influencers that you identified, whether across Facebook or about Twitter, and what I understand is that the influencers obviously have a certain amount of reach with a certain larger number of people,
Yes,
and that's why they're
that's right.
influencers. Is it possible using the tool to also help get a profile of who their sphere of influence is? So for example, different influencers will have an influence in a certain profile of audiences, and therefore it makes
Yes.
our messaging and targeting far more specific via that influencer. Is
That's
that
right.
texture possible or not?
Yes, that was actually I think a very good suggestion from Gina, right? We were brainstorming over the last few weeks on what we can do together. So that's where she has the concept of active mom, fashion mom, right? So we know that this group of moms respond well to fashion, right? So potentially you can actually pull up the influencers in this space to champion your product, your brand. So it becomes more targeted, like what you have said, right? So unfortunately, this portion, we just started it on Friday. So I not totally happy with the train results yet. So that's why I didn't present it to you, right? But you can imagine that it's definitely possible if your sample size is big, right? When we pull out a list of prospects who talk about. First, we need to identify that they are expectant mom, right? Or a influencer in the space of childcare, pregnancy, and so on, right? So we have this list of people. Then we look at the data that they post. Do they talk about fashion, about maternity dress, right? Do they talk about baby bumps, right? These are more words that are associated to fashion, right? So active mom will be those who are interested in sports, who live a more active lifestyle, right? So you may also want to target different, you may have a different marketing campaign for different segments of customer. Yes.
One question from my side. So we are currently talking about just the third trimester mom, right? But she is in one phase where she'll remain for 3 months, then she moves to a parent, then like a toddler, and her concerns will change as we go along.
Yes.
I know I'm going a little broad, but when we target the third trimester, and let's say we come back to you with a challenge, now I want to talk to the newborn baby. How frequently do you refresh this set of people that you target? Like for the same woman, if let's say we targeted a third trimester, she's in the database, but obviously within 3 months, that she needs to go out to another database and somebody else needs to come in. So how do you manage this churn? Because we want to stay with this for with this movement for 2 years. So how do we manage this churn and take this forward?
Yes, it's a very good question actually. Right? I remember when when I have a child, I was pleasantly surprised that the milk company whom I signed up a membership actually gave me a free complimentary can for the next stage of my baby's life. Right? It was quite a pleasant surprise, right? So I know what you're talking about, right? So this system, right, as it is today, we don't keep track of the lifespan of the person, but it's possible to build it in, right? So currently, as it is, it doesn't do that, right? So third trimester, I just said, I think it is not easy to segment. So segmentation into active mom, into fashion mom is probably more doable than third trimester mom, right? Simply because there are not enough data that we pull out from the Australian tweet that allude to third trimester mom, right? Ironically, in our Singapore tweet, we actually did pick up more tweets on very specific posts talking about third trimester, all right? So third trimester will be those entering the 25th week, right? So they even have hashtag 25th week. So it sounds like it's a kind of a milestone, hashtag 25th week, right? So it depends on social context. In Australian tweet, we don't have much of those data talking about the third trimester.
So, but essentially, it's for every, let's say every trimester before and after childbirth, you will refresh the database with new sets of consumers. You don't particularly focus on transitioning the same consumer to the next database.
Yes, that's right. Okay. That's right. So it's a very good feature as we realize when we do this project, right? So it's something that we would like to investigate on how we can actually profile the life cycle. So it become a life cycle of the profile rather than just a static snapshot. Yeah.
Actually, thank you for your explanation on it. I have two questions. One is that how do you analyze the segmentations based on these contents, social media contents? Because usually, traditionally, we do the face-to-face interview, and then we can get the survey. We do the segmentation, but via this social media contents, what kind of methodology do you use? And also the other is that nowadays we are compared between the traditional market research and then social media monitoring. So instead replacement of market research, this social monitoring can expand where? So that's one of my questions.
Right. Okay, so the first part is what is the market segmentation to use, right? That, unfortunately, is something that the tool may not be able to tell you, right? The tool can do a lot of content categorization. They are untrained, right? They are unsupervised, and we don't manipulate with the data, right? So you will see a lot of content clusters in the form of a tech cloud, right? But to group all this into a term that is meaningful for marketing will require expertise like Gina, yourself, like the word active mom. Active mom is an interesting segmentation that I think everybody at FMCG will understand. Active fashion, right? But the machine may not understand this. You need to be trained to understand what is active, right? So first, you got to come up with a label, right? So the label is active mom or active babies or active whatever, all right? What do you mean by active? So this is where we can see where are the content clusters. We can group them into the label called active mom. Like when Gina first gave us the challenge, he says that group them into consumer segmentation like active, fashion, right? So we took a look into our content classes. We discovered that people in the tweets there were mention of yoga, there were mention of just a simple walking. These are stemming in the English language, right? So the content actually give us indication of what we can use to define active mom, right? So this setup is a one-time setup, right? We need to understand from you as a marketeer what are the segmentation that actually give you greater meaning, right? It give you greater ability to do targeting, right? Once we know this segment, right, we will have to build up the clusters, which are actually keywords like yoga, walking, exercise, right, or health conscious mom, which are those who talk about vitamins, those who talk about health issues related to child care or prenatal care, right? So once we set up this, subsequently you can just sit back and enjoy your data, all right? Whether it can replace a round table.
Sorry, we have to move pretty much soon.
Oh, sorry about that. Oh, sure.
For another
Okay,
event.
all right.
So I'm sorry, let's
Sure,
continue
right.
tomorrow.